Imagine being so um, thoroughly loved by your community and so respected by your peers that you literally have to spend months researching how to disguise your own suicide.
Right, just to make it look like a boating accident.
Exactly. Disguising it just to spare your neighbors the awkwardness of the truth. Welcome to the deep dive. I mean, if you're listening to this, have you ever looked at the most successful person you know and just wondered what their breaking point actually looks like?
Because today, we are looking at a man who found his, and it is a terrifying premise, honestly, because it dismantles all those metrics we usually use to measure a successful, stable life.
Yeah, we look at the property they own or their career accolades, marital longevity.
Right, and we just assume that those things equal internal peace.
And that is the exact illusion that gets completely shattered by our source material today. We're doing a deep dive into an advanced reader's copy of a novel titled The Things We Never Say by Elizabeth Strout.
It's incredible. Strout really takes a scalpel to domestic tranquility here.
She does. Our mission today is to unpack these subterranean emotional currents running beneath a seemingly pristine existence. So we're looking at a high school history teacher named Artie Dam.
57 years old.
Yeah, and beloved by his students. They actually call him Dam Dam.
Which is such a great detail.
It really is. He's the guy cracking jokes in the hallway. He coaches the sports teams, attends all the cocktail parties in this coastal Massachusetts town.
And he lives on a private road, right? With a manicured lawn that just slopes right down to his own private wharf.
Exactly. He inherited this whole life from his wealthy in-laws. From the outside, he won the lottery.
Which is what makes his secret so jarring, because when the sun goes down, Jolly Artie retreats to the glow of his computer screen and actively plots his exit.
Right.
And it's the method of his planning that really gives us a clinical window into his mind, because he isn't acting out of, like, a chaotic, sudden impulse.
No, he is incredibly methodical. He wants out, but his primary concern is still managing the emotional fallout for his wife, Evie, and his adult son, Rob.
It's this dark twist on civic responsibility. He rules out a gun immediately.
Well, he doesn't own one.
Right. And he reasons that even if he buys one and wades into the ocean, his body will eventually wash up. A bullet wound is undeniable.
Yeah, the narrative would forever be, Artie Dam shot himself.
Hmm.
And he absolutely refuses to attach that stigma to his family's name.
He dismisses pills or hanging for the exact same reason. It leaves a mess. It leaves a definitive statement of despair that his family would have to answer for at every grocery store run for the rest of their lives.
He even contemplates driving his car into a concrete bridge abutment. He actually spends his free time driving around his picturesque town like scouting locations.
Trying to calculate the exact speed and angle needed to make it look like he just lost control of the wheel.
I just don't get that, though. I mean, if you're in enough pain to want to end your life, how does your brain even maintain the bandwidth to care about traffic patterns and insurance optics?
Well, because the suicidal ideation here isn't born from a loss of empathy. It's born from the exhaustion of it. But he abandons the car crash idea, too. Part of it is a fear of collateral damage, like he worries a witness might swerve and hit a tree. But the heavier, unstated reason is that a car crash specifically mirrors a central trauma in his family's history.
We really need to live with that trauma because it's essentially the inciting incident for the slow death of his marriage. 10 years ago, his son, Rob, who was 17 at the time, was driving at night with his girlfriend, Heather.
And the car crashed.
Yeah. Heather wasn't wearing a seatbelt, and she was crushed beneath the steering wheel, killed instantly. Rob only survived because of the airbags.
But there is a hidden layer to that tragedy. When the first responders arrived at the wreckage, they found Rob with his jeans belt buckle undone.
Right. The physical evidence heavily implied they were engaged in sexual activity when the car lost control.
And Artie doesn't find this out from the police. He figures it out during a tense legal deposition.
Yeah, a lawyer asks Rob if there was any distracting physical activity before the crash. And Rob turns completely pale, says no, but shoots this desperate, terrified glance at his father.
And Artie reads the room. He instantly understands the immense, suffocating guilt his son is carrying.
Knowing that, Artie realizes he cannot subject his wife and son to the sudden, violent trauma of police officers arriving at their door to report another fatal car crash.
So, by a process of elimination, he settles on drowning. He is an experienced sailor. He decides he can take his sailboat out past the breakwater, slip over the side in heavy gear, and the town will simply mourn a tragic, unavoidable maritime accident.
Think of Artie's life as a geological formation. On the surface, you have this sturdy, paved driveway, green grass, a solid foundation.
Right.
But underneath, the limestone has been dissolving for decades. An invisible subterranean river has washed away all the supporting earth. There's actually nothing holding the surface up anymore.
It's just a fragile crust waiting for a heavy footstep to trigger a massive sinkhole.
Exactly. The jovial teacher persona is just the crust.
To really understand the erosion, we have to look at the phrase Strout uses. Artie is suffering from an, quote, accretion of loneliness.
An accretion. It's not a sudden chemical imbalance.
No, it is a sedimentary buildup, layer upon layer of isolation over years. He reaches a point where he realizes he is, in his own internal dialogue, lonely enough to die.
And the primary source of that isolation is his marriage to Evie. Evie is a full-time family therapist. On paper, she should be the one person uniquely equipped to spot emotional distress right there in her own kitchen.
But she has become officious, highly professionalized, and just entirely inaccessible.
Why is that?
Well, that inaccessibility is actually her own defense mechanism. After Rob's fatal car crash, Evie's psychological response was totally action-oriented. She went to school, got her degree, and became a therapist.
Oh, I see. She professionalized her relationship with trauma to avoid feeling her own.
Exactly. But the byproduct of that armor is that she completely walled off her husband. They survived the tragedy of their son's accident by reconfiguring their marriage, but the new configuration left Artie standing on the outside.
There is this incredibly stark scene where they are in bed, and Artie tentatively brings up a dark childhood memory about mothers who drown their children.
He is essentially sending up a flare, right? Signaling his own dark thoughts.
Yeah. And Evie, the trained family therapist, literally responds, "That's awful, but I'm exhausted from work, I'm sorry," and she just rolls over and goes to sleep. It is a complete emotional dismissal.
Which really sets the stage for the one connection keeping Artie tethered to the earth, which is Flossie.
Right, Flossie. Flossie is the widow of Reginald MacDonald, this notoriously arrogant, brilliant mathematics professor at Boston University.
Reginald was the kind of guy who commanded a room and belittled anyone who didn't meet his intellectual standard.
Flossie, on the other hand, is loud. She wears overly dramatic makeup, her hair is dyed a harsh yellow, she drinks way too much at lunch, and Evie just finds her entirely distasteful.
But for Artie, Flossie is oxygen. After Reginald dies, Artie and Flossie start meeting every other Tuesday at a dive called Spud's Bar and Grill.
And they just sit in a booth and laugh until they can't breathe. Flossie will be weeping, mascara running down her cheeks, talking about how she misses her husband, while in the exact same breath calling him an insufferable jerk.
She is a mess of contradictions. She is unfiltered.
And she provides the one space in Artie's life where he doesn't have to perform. He doesn't have to be jolly Artie the teacher or the accommodating husband to Evie.
Right. Flossie recounts these wild, inappropriate dreams she has, and they just howl with laughter. It's bizarre, but it is authentic human connection.
And then the structural integrity of his life takes a fatal hit. Flossie decides to move to Ohio to live near her daughter. The lifeline is severed.
With Flossie gone, the accretion of loneliness hits critical mass.
This brings us to a crucial thematic concept in the text. Evie casually mentions one evening that Reginald, the arrogant professor, used to argue that the famous John Donne quote was wrong. Reginald insisted that every man is an island.
Yes. And this idea becomes the lens through which we view the entire town. The text suggests that we all operate with a massive, terrifying blind spot. We move through our day staring right at our spouses, our children, our neighbors, and we cannot see their internal reality.
The cocktail party scene illustrates this perfectly. Artie and Evie attend a Friday night gathering at a neighbor's historic colonial home. You hear the clinking of wine glasses, the chatter about the upcoming high school soccer season.
Standard, polite society stuff.
Right. But Artie is standing by the fireplace, looking around the room, running a mental inventory. He knows the Davenport girl just quietly had an abortion. He knows the Merrill's daughter is struggling in a rehab facility.
He knows the high school principal has been carrying on an affair for a decade.
Yeah. But everyone in the room just smiles and talks about the humidity. They're all isolated islands, smiling at each other across dark water.
And the tragic irony is that Artie is the largest island in the room. Look at how the town perceives him. Evie thinks he is a considerate, if somewhat soft man who annoys her by wearing white athletic socks with dress shoes.
His son Rob views him as an uncomplicated, steady figure.
His students think he's a guardian angel. Nobody sees the man researching ocean currents to ensure his body doesn't wash ashore.
Okay, let me stop you there because this feels like a contradiction. If Artie is so hyper-attuned to the hidden pain of the Davenport girl and the Merrill family, how does he miss the warning signs in his own mind?
It's a great question.
I mean, if his empathy is so vast, why is he blind to his own terminal decline? Does his empathy for others actually blind him to his own needs?
Well, because you are assuming his empathy is a tool of perception, when in reality it is a tool of deflection.
The tool of deflection, wow.
Yeah. If you spend your entire life managing the emotional temperature of the people around you, which is a habit formed in his childhood, which we will examine, you lose the ability to read your own internal thermostat.
So you don't realize you are freezing to death until the hypothermia is irreversible.
Exactly. Artie's realization that he wants to die isn't accompanied by weeping or hysterics. It is a quiet, terrifyingly rational conclusion drawn from extreme emotional fatigue.
He literally stops engaging with the world. He gives up reading history books in the evening. Instead, he sits in the dark, bathed in the blue light of his computer monitor, obsessively watching true crime documentaries about men who murder their families.
He is isolating himself in the darkest corners of human behavior, which brings us to the precipice, the plunge.
The narrative takes a visceral turn here. It forces his quiet cerebral ideation to collide with physical reality, and it begins with a disruption of his logic.
A week before he plans to execute his quote-unquote accident, Artie experiences something totally uncharacteristic. He has a dream.
And Artie is a man grounded in dates, treaties, and facts. He doesn't play stock in dreams.
But this one is hyper-lucid. He dreams he is floating out to sea. He is sinking beneath the surface, drowning, but his eyes are open, looking up through the water at a bright blue sky dotted with puffy white clouds.
He wakes up in a cold sweat with a lingering sense of awe. He even mentions it to his doctor during a routine checkup, and the doctor casually throws out the word precognition.
Artie tries to dismiss it, but the imagery embeds itself in his psyche.
Fast forward to the following Saturday, the day of the accident, and the terror of this scene lies in how mundane it is.
Right, it's a beautiful, crisp afternoon. The sun is out.
Artie walks down to his private wharf. Rod actually drops by for a quick visit, completely unaware, and encourages his dad to enjoy the sail.
Artie puts on a heavy winter coat and a pair of clumsy rubber sailing boots. He climbs into his small wooden dinghy and rows out to where his sailboat is moored.
He stands up to transfer from the dinghy to the larger boat, and he slips.
A simple loss of footing, but the physics of the moment are unforgiving.
The line slips from his hand. The dinghy is immediately caught by a fast-moving, outgoing tidal current and swept away. Artie is left clinging to the slippery fiberglass stern of his sailboat, plunged into freezing, acid-cold water.
The heavy rubber boots immediately fill with water, acting like concrete weights. His winter coat becomes a sodden anchor.
He tries to pull himself up onto the deck, but he is 57, carrying extra weight, and his muscles lock up from the cold. He is forced to let go.
The current grabs him. He tries to tread water, reaching down frantically to yank the boots off, but he only swallows seawater.
Exhausted, he flips onto his back to conserve energy. He begins to sink. His head dips below the surface. He opens his eyes, looks up through the water, and sees the bright blue sky, the puffy white clouds.
It is the exact visual from his dream. The universe, or his own subconscious, has handed him his meticulously planned exit. The stage is perfectly set.
And what is his reaction? Does he feel relief? Does he welcome the dark?
No. His mind rebels violently. As the water fills his lungs, his singularly consuming thought is, "This cannot be happening. Please let this not be true."
Wow.
The proximity to the end instantly clarifies the illusion of his despair. He realizes with visceral terror that he does not want to die.
It's an incredible distinction. He didn't want to end his existence. He just desperately wanted to end this specific, suffocating iteration of life he was currently trapped in.
The suicidal ideation was a symptom of his isolation, not a genuine desire for nothingness.
And through pure blind luck, he doesn't reach nothingness. A local man named Kenneth Moynihan happens to be passing by in a motorboat with his son.
They spot Artie struggling, gun the engine, and manage to haul him over the gunwale using a canvas sling right as he loses consciousness.
The sensory shift is jarring. We go from the chaotic, freezing ocean to the sterile hum of a hospital room. Artie wakes up wrapped in heated blankets, a warm oxygen cannula in his nose, and he feels this strange, almost infantile peace.
The struggle is suspended. He has been reset.
But the psychological bill for his near miss comes due almost immediately. Evie is at his bedside, frantic, telling him how much he scared her.
But the true reckoning occurs when Evie steps out to the cafeteria, leaving Artie alone with his son, Rob.
Rob pulls a plastic chair right up to the bed. He ignores the monitors, he leans his face inches from Artie's, and the air leaves the room when Rob asks, "Dad, did you do it on purpose?"
Look at the dynamics of that question.
Yeah.
Rob isn't asking out of a detached curiosity. He is interrogating his father out of a desperate, localized terror.
Artie immediately denies it. He plays the fool. He says his boot slipped, but Rob doesn't retreat. He says, "You haven't been yourself for a while."
And then Rob delivers an analogy that completely shatters Artie's worldview.
Mm.
Rob says, "Remember when they sent those men to the moon? They sent up robots years ahead of time to explore the surface, so they knew they'd be safe when the astronauts finally got there."
Oh, man.
Rob says, "That's what you're like for me, Dad. You're my explorer. So if you ever did that, it would mean that I could do it too, and so you can't."
The weight of that confession is staggering. Rob is admitting that he is standing on the ledge. The guilt from the car crash that killed his girlfriend has been eating him alive for a decade.
He is battling his own severe suicidal ideation.
And what he tells Artie is, "You are my load-bearing wall. If you prove that the pain is unsurvivable by checking out, you give me permission to follow you. Your survival is the only thing mandating my own."
I mean, pause and consider the gravity of that realization. Have you ever viewed someone as an immovable rock, only to discover that they are secretly using your stability as their only tether to the earth?
Artie realizes that his life is not his own to discard. If he jumps, he drags his son down with him.
This exchange instantly vaporizes Artie's self-pity. The suicidal ideation is replaced by a fierce biological imperative to remain standing for his son. He looks Rob in the eye and says, with complete conviction, "I will never do that."
But how does a man go from researching drowning techniques to absorbing the existential dread of his adult son in the span of 24 hours? I mean, where does that specific brand of resilience come from?
To understand that, we have to look backward. We have to examine the soil Artie grew out of.
We have to contrast the multi-million-dollar waterfront property he lives in now with the sensory reality of his childhood. Artie's emotional hypervigilance, his desire to manage the pain of others, is entirely rooted in his origin story.
Right. Artie grew up in a damp, dimly lit basement apartment in Revere, Massachusetts. His father, Art, was a working-class superintendent for a block of apartment buildings.
He spent his days fixing boilers and unclogging drains. But the defining force in the household was Artie's mother, Mary. She was an Irish immigrant who suffered from severe, untreated psychosis.
She was repeatedly institutionalized at the state hospital.
The domestic environment was a minefield. Artie learned to survive by becoming an emotional seismograph.
He learned to detect the microscopic shifts in his mother's mood. When his father would whisper, "Mom's tired today," before heading out to fix a radiator, Artie knew the app.
So he adapted by becoming the entertainer. He became the cheerful, compliant child who tried to diffuse his mother's erratic anger with jokes and smiles.
But his older sister, Maria, lacked that agility. She was slower to read the room, desperate for her mother's approval, and she absorbed the physical violence of Mary's psychotic breaks.
Artie remembers Maria's pale arms constantly covered in yellowing, splotchy bruises. And there is one memory that haunts Artie above all others.
It takes place in the subcellar.
Yes. The subcellar was this dark, dirt-floored space under the stairs where they kept bulk supplies. Artie walks down there one day and finds young Maria standing in the shadows.
She looks terrified, caught in the act.
She is holding a box of confectionery sugar, eating the white powder straight out of the cardboard with a metal spoon. Her mouth is covered in white dust.
It is a devastating portrait of deprivation. Artie, looking back as an adult, realizes the metaphor. This abused, terrified girl was standing in the dirt, frantically trying to ingest something, anything sweet, because her external life was entirely devoid of it.
And Maria doesn't escape the darkness. She grows up, marries a firefighter, and gets pregnant. But the baby is still born.
And while recovering in the hospital, Maria suffers a massive brain aneurysm. It takes her a week to die.
And for that entire week, Artie sits vigil by her bed. Maria is unresponsive to the room, staring blankly at the ceiling tiles, just endlessly repeating the same phrase, "What are we going to do now, Mama? What are we going to do now?"
Those words become the soundtrack of Artie's internal life. He absorbs her panic and her helplessness.
So you take this heavy inheritance of working-class struggle, untreated mental illness, and brutal grief, and you force it into a collision course with Evie's background.
Right, because Evie is a product of old New England money, Brahmin stock. She comes from trust funds and historic lineage.
The class contrast isn't just a background detail. It is the silent architecture of their power dynamic.
We see this early in their relationship. Artie recalls a dinner where Evie's father casually inquires about the balance of Artie's student loans.
Artie names the figure, and the father simply pulls out a checkbook and pays the debt in full. It was framed as a generous gift so Artie could pursue his master's degree.
But over the decades, as Evie's irritation with Artie's working-class mannerisms grows, that check transforms in Artie's mind into a bill of sale. He begins to feel that he was purchased.
Evie constantly polices his behavior. The recurring symbol of this conflict is Artie's insistence on wearing thick, white athletic socks with his black dress sneakers.
Evie despises it. She finds it aesthetically offensive and socially embarrassing. But what she really despises is the Revere basement.
She views Artie as overly sentimental, soft, lacking the crisp, detached stoicism of her own class. She married a project, and the unspoken hierarchy isolates him within his own home.
Artie carries all this historical weight into his classroom. He doesn't just teach the dates of the Civil War to his high school juniors.
No, he distributes copies of actual mud-stained letters written by teenage soldiers and field nurses from Massachusetts. He forces these affluent kids to confront the visceral terror of history, because Artie understands that history isn't an abstract timeline. It is simply the aggregate of individual human suffering.
And the brilliance of the narrative here is how the historical tension bleeds into the present day. The author utilizes the broader political and societal climate as an atmospheric pressure cooker, pressing down on the characters and fraying their nerves.
The town is visibly cracking. There is a deeply unsettling scene at a high school soccer match. What starts as a standard Saturday afternoon game erupts into a massive chaotic brawl between the players, which spills over into the parents in the bleachers.
The referee is assaulted.
Later, in Artie's classroom, a quiet student named Jacob Aronson reveals the catalyst. A fodder from the opposing team screamed a vicious anti-Semitic slur at him.
The incident shatters the illusion of the polite, progressive coastal town. The hate is right there, hovering just beneath the surface. And the school principal, Hoover Lakeland, is buckling under the strain.
We learn through a flash forward that Hoover's story ends in tragedy. He will take his own life 2 years later amidst an intense FBI investigation and a barrage of death threats for harboring undocumented immigrants.
But in the present timeline, Hoover is dealing with the immediate fallout.
Now, we need to be clear here. The sources contain this intense political tension, and we are completely impartial on this. We're not taking any sides. We're just reporting on the content provided to show how the author uses these events to build the atmospheric stress.
Exactly, we're just observing the narrative. So Hoover pulls Artie into his office, closes the blinds, and drops a grenade. A contingent of conservative parents has formally petitioned the school board demanding that Artie allocate equal instructional time to teaching the Confederate side of the Civil War.
They are threatening to pull their children from the district if he refuses.
Hoover identifies this demand as anticipatory obedience. He views it as the community preemptively bending the knee to a rising tide of authoritarianism.
The characters throughout the book are plagued by a pervasive, existential dread regarding an upcoming presidential election. They fear the country is slipping off its axis into sanctioned cruelty.
This societal dread forces Artie to grapple with a massive philosophical dilemma. He looks at the cyclical hatred in the country. He looks at the working-class trauma of his childhood. He looks at his purchased marriage, and he starts asking Hoover and anyone who will listen about free will.
This is where we must introduce Carl Jung, because Jung's framework is the key to decoding Artie's journey.
Jung posited that much of human behavior is driven by the unconscious mind, the hidden repository of our traumas, repressed desires, and inherited instincts.
Jung famously said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate."
So Artie is asking, is any of this a choice? Are those parents at the school board acting out of free will, or are they just reciting a historical script of tribalism?
Was his marriage to Evie a choice? Or just the inevitable collision of her wealth and his poverty? Was his suicide attempt a choice? Or just the logical endpoint of his mother's psychosis playing out in his own brain?
Jung argued that if we don't recognize our shadow, the unexamined, often dark parts of our psyche, we project it outward and become trapped in cycles of causality. We just react mechanically to our programming.
Artie is desperate to know if humanity can ever break the script.
And his near drowning provides the shock necessary to break his own. After he survives the freezing water, the metaphorical blind spot vanishes.
He stops watching true crime videos. He starts looking at the people around him and finally seeing the water they're drowning in.
We witness this awakening through a series of interactions that highlight the hidden connective tissue of the town.
Take Tom, the local plumber. Just days before Artie's accident, Tom comes to the house to fix a dripping faucet in the bathroom. It's a completely routine service call.
But Tom sits on the edge of Artie's porcelain bathtub, drops his wrench, and begins to sob uncontrollably.
He confesses that he just discovered his wife is having an extended affair. Tom looks at Artie and asks, "What the hell is wrong with me that I thought my marriage was fine?"
Now, connect that back to Artie's classroom. Tom's last name is Marino. He is the father of Danny Marino, a deeply cynical, disruptive student in Artie's history class.
Right. On the first day of school, Danny wrote an essay declaring that people suck and society is a big stinking lie.
Before the plumbing incident, Artie just viewed Danny as an edgy teenager. But armed with the context of Tom's broken heart, Artie realizes Danny isn't just acting out.
Danny is carrying the explosive secret of his mother's infidelity and his father's destruction. The anger makes complete sense.
Then there is Rhonda Lazar. Rhonda is a social outcast. She wears clothes that don't fit right, constantly tugging at her hemline. She walks with a stiff, awkward gait.
Danny Marino mocks her ruthlessly. One afternoon, Rhonda lingers after the bell rings. She confides in Artie that she has the SADS because her mother is crazy.
The whole town knows Rhonda's mother wanders the commercial district in her pajamas, arguing with store clerks.
The old, guarded Artie would have offered a polite, professional platitude. The new, awakened Artie makes a radically vulnerable choice.
He sits on the edge of his desk and tells this awkward teenager that his own mother suffered from severe mental illness and was locked away in a state hospital.
It is a massive breach of professional distance, but it is exactly what Rhonda needs to survive. Hearing that this respected, stable figure survived the exact chaos she goes home to every night rewires her brain.
She tells Artie he has a guardian angel. And that brief moment of shared trauma becomes the catalyst for Rhonda eventually going to seminary and becoming a minister.
Artie breaking his own script alters the trajectory of her life.
He even reevaluates his daughter-in-law, Francesca, a highly successful concert pianist. Artie recalls sitting in Carnegie Hall watching her perform.
He strips away the glamour of the venue and realizes the profound isolation of her reality. Sitting alone on a wooden bench under a spotlight, physically draining herself to manufacture emotion for a room full of strangers shrouded in darkness.
He is seeing the matrix of pain connecting everyone. He is forging a real friendship with Ken Moynihan, the man who pulled him from the ocean. He is stepping out of the shadows.
But just as he finds his footing, he is hit by a tidal wave that challenges everything he has just learned about empathy and free will.
We arrive at the climax of the narrative, a revelation that fundamentally destabilizes his identity.
The setup is tense. Rob calls Artie and announces that he and Francesca are separating. It's framed as amicable, but Rob's behavior is erratic.
He introduces a new girlfriend named Rachel, but he is vibrating with an unspoken anxiety.
Artie, now hyper-attuned to the emotional frequency of his son, decides to drive out to Rob's apartment in Somerville on a random Wednesday afternoon to check on him.
The apartment is a classic transitional space: spider plants, overflowing bookshelves, the detritus of a stalling marriage.
Rob sits down across from Artie, his hands shaking so violently he can barely hold his coffee mug. He covers his face, begins to weep, and finally forces the words out. He looks at Artie and says, "You're not my father."
Artie's brain simply rejects the data. He thinks Rob is making a bizarre joke, or perhaps having a breakdown.
But Rob opens a desk drawer and hands Artie a piece of heavy, expensive stationery. It is a deathbed letter written by Reginald MacDonald.
Yes, the arrogant professor, Evie's nemesis, Flossie's deceased husband.
The language Reginald uses in the letter is sociopathic in its detachment. He addresses it "Dear Boy." He outlines how decades ago, during Artie and Evie's very public, agonizing struggle with infertility, he and Evie engaged in a 3-month affair.
Reginald writes that he simply accommodated Evie's desire for a child.
Accommodated. I mean, the sheer arrogance of that word.
Exactly. Reginald admits his motive for writing the letter is pure ego. Facing his own mortality, he wants to stake a claim on his biological legacy.
He refuses to die without taking credit for Rob. And he provides the receipts. He informs Rob that he left a genetic sample with a secure lab in Boston.
Rob tells Artie he went to the lab, he took the swab, the DNA is a definitive match. Reginald MacDonald is Rob's biological father.
Which means Evie, the woman who complained about Artie's white socks and sighed at his working-class memories, has been lying to his face every single morning for 28 years.
She allowed Artie to believe he was the father, allowed him to navigate the grief of their fertility struggles, and socialized at cocktail parties with the biological father of her child, while Artie stood next to her holding a drink.
I mean, stop right there. If someone drops that bomb on you, the biological historical script demands a specific reaction.
Right.
You rage, you flip the coffee table, you drive home, pack a bag, and burn the marriage to the ground.
The Jungian causality we discussed earlier dictates exactly that. The betrayal is so foundational that the human ego requires vengeance to restore balance.
But this is the crucible of free will. How does Artie react?
Artie looks at his son. He sees a terrified 27-year-old man who is already battling suicidal thoughts, who is getting a divorce, and who now believes he has just lost his father.
Artie takes a breath and he tells Rob a story.
It is the defining moment of his character. He doesn't mention Evie's betrayal. He focuses entirely on the child.
He tells Rob about holding him in his arms when he was just an infant. He describes feeling a physical sensation, like a billowing cloud of love expanding in his chest.
And he tells Rob that over the last 28 years, every time he thought the cloud couldn't possibly get any larger, it did. It just kept growing, enveloping both of them.
Artie looks Rob directly in the eyes and says, "You're my son. It makes no difference to me."
It is an act of transcendent, radical grace. He chooses to absorb a world-shattering trauma rather than let it strike his son. He breaks the cycle of generational damage right there in the Somerville apartment.
Francesca, who has just returned from a trip to Paris, walks into the apartment shortly after. She has known the secret.
She looks at Artie, expecting devastation, and is floored by his composure.
Because Artie has already made his next move, he asks Rob if Evie knows that the secret is out. Rob admits he was too cowardly to tell her.
So Artie establishes the terms of their new reality. He says, "I'm not going to tell her that I know." Rob agrees. They forge a silent pact to protect Evie from the fallout of her own deception.
Let's view this through the Jungian lens. Artie's eyes are finally fully open. He realizes why Rob never shared his physical characteristics.
He suddenly recognizes that Rob's specific loping gait is an exact replica of Reginald MacDonald's walk. The matrix is decoded.
He realizes his entire adult life is an architectural facade. The front of the building looks like a sturdy, legitimate family, but if you walk around back, it is entirely propped up by the wooden 2x4s of Evie's deception.
But because he sees the facade clearly, he is no longer a victim of it. He exercises true free will. He defies the script of vengeance and chooses to love his son anyway.
However, there is a brutal psychological cost to this choice. Choosing grace does not magically evaporate the trauma of the betrayal.
Artie commits to carrying a radioactive secret. He agrees to wake up every day, look at his wife, and actively suppress the knowledge that her entire existence with him is built on a lie.
The human brain cannot maintain that level of cognitive dissonance indefinitely. The pressure has to vent.
And the fracture happens over something aggressively trivial. It's just a normal evening. They are sitting in the living room.
And Evie, with a casual, almost breezy cruelty, mentions that her father never really cared for Artie.
It is a microscopic slight, but it acts as the spark in a room filled with gas. All the repressed rage, the class condescension, the feeling of being purchased by the student loan check, the policing of his clothing, and now the massive weight of her 28-year infidelity ignites.
Artie snaps. He fires back that the feeling was mutual. He calls her beloved wealthy father vulgar.
Evie is stunned by the venom in his voice and demands to know why. Artie replies, "Because he had so much money."
The ensuing argument is cold, bitter, and fundamentally fractures the remaining ice of their marriage.
The stress of this confrontation, layered over the secret he is harboring, triggers a dissociative episode. Artie experiences what psychologists call an enactment.
Right. When a person suffers a massive, paralyzing loss of agency, like discovering your lineage was hijacked by another man, the subconscious will sometimes compel them to act out a scenario where they take something that doesn't belong to them, just to momentarily feel in control of reality.
Which explains the bizarre sequence that follows. A few days after the fight, Artie is in a local drugstore. He is in a hazy, detached state.
He picks up a cheap, flimsy plastic comb. For absolutely no logical reason, he peels the price tag off, snaps the comb into pieces, and shoves it into his pocket. He walks out.
A 57-year-old pillar of the community stealing a piece of plastic.
It is a test of the boundaries of reality. He stole it, and the sky didn't fall. The enactment escalates because the internal pressure hasn't been relieved.
He gets in his car and drives 3 towns over to a wealthy, upscale commercial district. He walks into Schwarz's, a high-end men's clothing boutique.
His conscious justification is that his shirt cuffs are fraying, and he needs a replacement. He selects a very expensive shirt and pays for it at the counter. The owner places it in a premium shopping bag.
But the dissociative state takes over again. Artie wanders back into the aisles. He takes two more high-end shirts off the rack, walks into a fitting room, and mechanically stuffs them into his shopping bag, right on top of the one he purchased.
He walks toward the front doors, and he crosses the threshold. The anti-theft alarms instantly begin shrieking, the shrill, deafening sound of reality crashing back down on him.
The store owner, an older man named Charles Schwartz, intercepts him.
The scene in the back room of the boutique is excruciating. Artie is escorted into a cramped storage area. He sits on a wooden chair next to an ironing board.
The adrenaline spikes, and his body betrays his terror. He is sweating through his clothes. His lower lip is trembling so violently he can't speak.
He realizes, with horrifying clarity, what he has done. He is going to be arrested. His mugshot will be in the local paper. The teacher of the year, the respected husband, exposed as a petty thief. The facade he worked so hard to protect is about to be destroyed by his own hand.
Charles Schwartz asks for his driver's license. Artie hands it over, shaking. Schwartz takes the ID into his small office and sits down at his computer.
He Googles Artie Dam. He sees the teacher of the year articles. He sees the spotless civic record. He realizes the man trembling in the storage room is not a criminal. He is a man experiencing a catastrophic breakdown.
Schwartz walks back into the storage room. He looked at Artie. He pulls the two stolen shirts out of the bag and sets them aside.
And Schwartz says, "In my time, I've seen this kind of thing, and it often comes after a loss of some sort. I'm not going to ask you one thing about your life. You just get up and leave. And then when you come back in someday, you just pay for whatever you get. Okay, then."
It is an act of pure, unadulterated mercy. Schwartz doesn't demand an explanation. He doesn't leverage his power to humiliate Artie.
He simply recognizes the unmistakable posture of a man crushed by the world, and he chooses to open the door and let him walk away.
Contrast that moment with the rest of Artie's life. He is fundamentally betrayed by his own wife, the person who stood at an altar and promised to protect him. He is betrayed by the man he shared drinks with.
Yet, in his darkest, most humiliating moment, stripped of all his titles and dignity, he receives the most profound grace from a complete stranger who owed him nothing.
The shock of that grace snaps Artie back to the present. The dissociative fog lifts. He gets into his car and drives home, having to pull over onto the shoulder multiple times because his hands are shaking too hard to grip the steering wheel.
He walks into his empty, quiet waterfront house. He opens the refrigerator, takes out some leftover cold sush, sits alone at the kitchen table, and eats.
It is the quiet acceptance of his new reality. He realizes he cannot fix the past, he cannot undo Evie's betrayal, and he cannot cure Rob's trauma.
But he can choose how he exists within the wreckage. He accepts that he is now a conscious architect of the facade. He will live the lie with Evie, knowing that she is living her lie with him.
The difference is he is no longer blind to the terms of the arrangement.
What an unbelievable, harrowing roadmap of the human psyche we have just navigated. We started with a man slowly suffocating under the accretion of loneliness, so walled off from his own life that he meticulously planned his death just to keep the lawn looking nice.
Then the universe, via a freezing ocean current, violently intervenes. He is forced to confront the terror of actual death, which burns away his numbness.
He re-enters the world with his eyes wide open, finally seeing the quiet desperation in the plumber, the bullied student, and his own son.
Only to be rewarded for his newfound empathy with a generational betrayal that rewrites his own biology. His son is not his blood. His marriage is a 28-year deception.
Yet, instead of burning the house down, he exercises the ultimate free will. He absorbs the shockwave to protect his son. He breaks the cycle.
The inescapable truth of this narrative is that we are surrounded by vast, unknowable oceans. The teenager acting out in the back of the classroom, the spouse sitting quietly across the kitchen table reading the news, the jovial teacher telling jokes in the hallway. Every single one of them is managing a subterranean world of silent trauma.
But equally, as we saw with Charles Schwartz and Artie himself, they possess the capacity for hidden, extraordinary grace. Which leaves us with a final thought to chew on. We spent this time unpacking Carl Jung, causality, and the scripts we inherit. Artie spent his life wondering if we were all just playing out the inevitable, trapped by our history and our biology. But when faced with the ultimate deception, Artie defied the script. He chose radical love for his son. So, here's a question for you. Are the secrets we keep from each other the things that destroy us? Or are they sometimes the very things that allow us to survive?